Okay, great. You're successful. But have you made the devil's bargain? My name is Craig Filek, and for the past 15 years, I've been coaching some of the most successful men in America to clarify what's next after they achieve success. And in this video, we're going to talk about what is the devil's bargain? Did you make it? And if you did, which you probably did, how do you get out of it? So let's talk about what the devil's bargain actually is. This comes from a early 1800s book by Goethe, who you probably know as the German philosopher that said, whatever you can do or dream, you can begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. At the moment of commitment, the entire universe conspires to assist you. The moment one definitely commits oneself, then providence moves too. That's pretty damn good. So he was a writer and he has several books, but the one that the devil's bargain comes from is Faust, or Dr. Faustus. And Faust was an alchemist, and he was in German in folklore legend. He made the devil's bargain. He met with Mephistopheles. He was an alchemist, and he wanted knowledge and material power beyond what he could create for himself. And so he traded his soul, and he had that material knowledge and power for 24 years, and he spent eternity in hell. Now, that's an extreme example, but what does the devil's bargain actually mean in terms of our experience of daily life? I actually really like the way that Dr. Robert A. Johnson, who is a Jungian analyst, he was Carl Jung's youngest student, talks about this in the Fisher King and the Handless Maiden, which are actually two myths that come out of the 12th century. These myths describe the very beginnings of mechanistic, you could call it the Industrial Revolution. So this is when water wheels emerged. I'm just going to tell you the story so you can really understand it. There was a miller in town, and he worked by the sweat of his brow. And he did fine. He was making a good living for his wife and his daughter, and he had a good life in town, and everybody respected him. And then one day, the devil comes to him and says, you know, you're working too hard for what you have. You should be working a lot less, and you should be getting a lot more. The miller, being a simple man, says, well, how do you mean? And he says, I will make you wealthy beyond your wildest dreams. More money than you could ever spend. And you will barely have to work for it. And the miller says, that sounds pretty good. How are we going to do this? Devil says, you leave that to me. And he says, hold on. What do you want for it? And the devil says, oh, just that which stands behind the old woodshed. And he thinks to himself, the cypress tree? Okay. And he shakes with the devil. The devil builds him a water wheel. And so now, instead of grinding flour with the sweat of his brow, the water wheel is doing all the work. And he's selling more flour than he's ever sold, making more money than he's ever made. This is the beginning of industrialization. So in a way, we've all made the devil's bargain, and you can see that in things like our cell phones, technology, right? It sucks the soul right out of us. And in return, what do we get? Endless supplies of cheap dopamine, endless rewards. That in and of itself is a devil's bargain. But for successful midlife men, it cuts a little bit deeper. So in the story, which you can probably relate to if you've got passive investments at this point, if you've got a business running without you, you get to a point where you don't feel so great. You're kind of lost, bored, confused, frustrated. Maybe you feel empty. And what this relates to in the myth, in the legend of the handless maiden, is the devil comes back and he says to the miller, I have come to claim my price. And the miller says, oh yeah, the old cypress tree. And they march out behind the woodshed, and he's got the axe, and he's prepared to cut down the cypress tree and give it to the devil. But there's a twist. His daughter is standing behind the woodshed at the moment that they happen to walk back there, and he panics. And eventually, through some negotiations, the devil doesn't take his daughter, but he takes her hands. So they chop her hands off, and it's gory and brutal. But like any Jungian interpretation of an old story, an old legend, or a myth. There's a reason for this. What does the daughter represent in our interior experience? It represents the feeling function. So as men, we give up our ability to feel because we kind of set in and we're going for something, and we lose our ability to be in touch with our authenticity, with our internal feeling function. But it's not totally gone. Just her hands are gone. So the daughter walks around the house and they have all this opulence, and she says, "But what can I do?" And they say, "Oh, you don't have to do anything. We've got maids for that. We've got servants for that. We've got all sorts of fancy gadgets and things that can handle that. We don't need you to do anything." And this is why I suggest you probably made the devil's bargain. You've got the opulence of a king of even 100 years ago. Anybody living in the suburbs has a washing machine, a dishwasher, a blender, a refrigerator, right? Things that I think there's, on the average, enough appliances and electricity in the home to do the work of something like 70 servants. We've all got that now. We are all living like kings. And the wealthiest among us, the top, let's say 10%, have so much opulence in the history of civilization that you run out of things to do. And then what's left is all this time to think, to create, to philosophize, to connect with people. But what do we end up doing? Scrolling on our phones, taking another luxury vacation, going on another expensive shopping spree, whether that's to the Ferrari dealer or whether that's to whatever your favorite in Vegas. You're going to go buy a $1,000 shirts. What does that give you? Does that actually fill you up inside? No, because that inner daughter, the feeling function, doesn't know what to do. So through the story, she ends up running away, marrying the king of another kingdom, and having a child. And he has Merlin come in and give her silver hands. So he replaces her feeling hands with silver hands. And you've met women like this, women who couldn't milk a cow, they can barely care for a baby. They have silver hands. They're not connected to their heart. They're not connected to their soul. And that's what we become, right? We don't want our $1,000 shirt to get a stain on it. Oh no, my $1,000 shirt got a stain on it. From what? From enjoying yourself, from laughing and maybe getting, scuffed up in the grass or spilling some wine on, what would you do that would get a stain on your shirt? Living your life. That's the silver hands. We lose that ability to just be a human being. And so again, we've traded our soul for opulence, for material reward. And if you're honest with yourself, it's a kind of hell. It's a kind of hell. It's like King Midas. You can't eat gold. So this awareness has been around in civilization for thousands of years. Ever since we created leverage, ever since we created the ability to have more than we could possibly eat in a day, more than we could possibly spend in a lifetime. If this is resonating for you, what do you do about it? Well, this is what the handless maiden ends up doing. She takes the baby and she runs away. She can't stand it anymore. And in the woods, she's running and everybody's chasing after her. And she eventually gets away from them and she's alone. And she ends up trying to cross this brook, a little stream. And she trips and she drops her baby in the stream. And she turns and there's nobody around. Help me, help me, help my baby, help me. But there's nobody there to do the work for her. So for the first time in her life, she has to get involved. What does she do? She dives in to the little stream and she scoops up the baby and she comes up and her hands are restored to human hands. So what does that mean? What it means is that we have to care so much about something besides our silver hands, besides our water wheel mill that's just cranking out. It's like an ATM. It's just spitting out money. We have to care about something more than that. And when we give ourselves wholly to that thing, our hands are restored and we're renewed and we become whole and we integrate. And what that means for us as successful midlife men is it means that our authenticity comes back online. And what that looks like in the successful men that I've worked with over the decades is that we realize that there's something inside of us that has always been there, that feeling function that we've ignored for good reason. Usually it starts with some kind of trauma in childhood where we're told, no, good boys don't do those things. Good boys don't say those things, right? Responsible men push that down and they work and they do, right? And that's real. And we need to do that. That's part of socialization. There's nothing wrong with that because it matures us and it brings us to a point where we're standing on top of Success Mountain. We've checked all the check boxes. We got the house, the wife, the kids, the cars, the toys, the vacations. And we're looking around. We're saying, now what? This is the answer to now what? Now what is we find something that we love so much. We're willing to dive in and get messy and get dirty and bring forth that authenticity into the world. And that's what I call the second mountain. But you have to go, so we spend our whole lives climbing, that when we get to the top, we don't want to leave because everything in us has been up, 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 grow, 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 grind, trudge, scale. And then we get here, and what we don't want to do is go down what Seth Godin calls the dip, the valley from the top of Success Mountain to the trailhead of your second mountain, which you can climb for decades. That's where you get the meaning and fulfillment and sense of purpose and ultimately leave your impact and your legacy is your second mountain. And that's equivalent to the handless mating, the feeling function in us saying, fuck it. I care about this more than I care about anything else. The kicker is that she was still a queen of the kingdom. And so the story doesn't actually proceed from there, but she can go back to the kingdom and she can nourish her baby and she can be the queen of the kingdom and the wife of the king. And so there's an internal, remember, this is Jungian interpretation, right? Carl Jung talked about the collective unconscious. And so going in and finding that feeling function inside of ourselves and connecting that with the king that we've become in the external world, that's what makes us whole. And you'll notice it in relationship with your wife or your partner. When you start to feel again, your relationship with her, the texture of your relationship with her will start to change. She'll notice it. She'll feel it immediately, like instantly. And she'll say, oh, hello. It's a good feeling. But what does it mean for climbing that second mountain? What it means is that the thing that you were born to do, the thing that's been trapped inside you, as you matured to the point where you can actually pursue it, because you don't have to work for money anymore, because you don't have to trade your soul for material resources, security, stability. You've got that. You've got your investments. You've got your business running without you. You've got everything on lock. Now that frees you up to go through the dark forest between the two mountains and find the trailhead of your second mountain. And every single man that I've brought to that trailhead looks at me and says, I've known this my whole life. This is not news to me. But somehow it gets lost. And that losing of our innate purpose, that is the devil's bargain. We trade that moral, spiritual awareness within us for the ego mind strategy in order to create wealth, security, stability, to produce and provide for our families. And that's a good thing. That's a healthy thing. That's a natural step. That's usually a 12 to 20 year phase of a man's life, which brings us to midlife. Now, it can take 10 to 20 years to find what is that first mountain. You might have some false starts. You might have a bankruptcy or two in there. That's all part of it. But once you find that first mountain, it's about 12 to 20 years before it's working without you. You can sell it, whatever that is. You've amassed enough resources, enough wealth. If you have a high paying profession or you're a salesman, whatever that is, where you reach the point where you're looking around, you're saying, okay, something else is ready to happen. But that's where we run on a roadmap. Society tells us, here's the checklist, go to school, get good grades, make that money, get the house, the wife, the kids, the cars, the toys, the vacations. All of that is very clear. But when we get to the top of that first mountain, the backside, that's not clear. There is no roadmap. And the reason there's no roadmap is because your second mountain is unique to you. First mountain, I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a salesman, CEO. It's cookie cutter. The second mountain, when you see your second mountain, you say, oh yeah, that mountain was made for me. I was born to climb that mountain. It's very individual. So there is no roadmap. You have to create it. And that's what we do at purpose mapping. So if that resonates with you, if that's the phase of life that you're in, and you're at that crisis at the summit, as Harvard Business Review calls it, and you'd like to figure out what do you do next, that's what we specialize in. Love to speak with you. Go ahead and book a call, or go ahead and watch our Midlife Crisis 2.0 video if you want to just spend a little bit more time getting acclimated to what's going on for you. This is my thesis where we talk about men have never lived longer, never retired younger or wealthier, and that masculine evolutionary purpose starts to wake up in us and says, great, you sold your company for $30 million yesterday. What did you do today? How are you contributing now? And that contribution versus going to the beach, golfing your way to the grave, staying stuck on the golden hamster wheel, hang gliding into a hurricane, looking for that rush, that dopamine, that second mountain, that contribution, that's what the handless maiden, that's how she gets her hands back. You have to find that thing that you love. And that's what we're here to help you do. So look forward to speaking with you soon. And if you know a man who would benefit from hearing this message, go ahead and share it with him. Bye for now.